The moderator for the fourth session is Chen Yizhen, teacher Chen Yizhen 老师. Composer Chen Yizhen is a Taiwanese composer of instrumental and electroacoustic music. She holds a degree from National Taiwan Normal University, the University of Michigan, and the University of Maryland. Her primary teachers include Bright Sheng, Susan Botti, Robert Gibson, Lawrence Moss, and Mao Shen Chen. Chen has won the Walson Prize for her orchestral work Labyrinth, and her music has been presented in numerous conferences and festivals around the world. Recent projects include the Drifting Zero, a new music theatre piece for the 2017 innovative series, The Pilgrimage, and Full Moon in White Nights for string octet, and Songs of Luminous Moment 3 for soprano Shakuhachi, Sheng, and Zheng, featured in the 2017 Taipei International New Music Festival. As an avid champion of contemporary music, Chen is an active member of the Asian Composers League, ISCM Taiwan, and For Musica Taiwan. She has organized several contemporary music festivals and forums, and she currently serves as associate professor in the music department at National Jiayi University, where she teaches composition, music theory, and analysis. And she also teaches at the Taipei National University of Arts. So welcome to Chen Yizhen, the moderator for this session.
Thank you, George.
And our first presenter is Isabel Benito Gutierrez. Isabel is a multidisciplinary composer and educator interested in the combination of music with other disciplines. Her research topics include performance art, improvisation, artistic collaboration, graphic scores, music and education, concert halls, and the search for new spaces for performing music and other artistic representations. She holds a PhD from the RNCM, the Royal Northern College of Music, in partnership with Manchester Metropolitan University. Her PhD thesis is titled Music as a Multidisciplinary Art, the Exchange of Music and Visual Elements, and the Role of the Participants. She is also interested in creating a new hybrid space where all arts could be present, a topic which she has developed during her MA in classical music industry. And as a composer, she has been commissioned by the RNCM, Santander Bank Foundation, Open Circuit Festival, among others. And her pieces have been performed by 1010, BCN 216, Riot Ensemble, and numerous other ensembles and performers. And Isabel's presentation today is titled Visual Elements in Music, Actions and Directions in Graphic and Verbal Scores. So welcome, Isabel. And you have 20 minutes for your presentation. I'll send you a message in the chat when you have 5 minutes left. So keep an eye out for that. Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much. Let's see. Can you all see this? Yeah? Okay. So thank you very much for having me today. So today I will talk about one part of my research, which is, as George said, is graphic scores. So first I will give a context about how graphic scores and verbal scores appeared. And then I will briefly give some examples from other composers, and then I will talk about 4 of my pieces which have some kind of graphic or verbal direction. So for some of the music written from the 20th century, the musical elements were not always important. So now composers will look at gestures, performativity, and collaboration performer-composer. So this can be also a very interesting point to build a piece. This collaboration could be extended not just to composers and performers, but also to professionals from other disciplines. And the process now is more collective. So there is a very blurry line between the performance and the music composition. And when I create graphic scores, I understand that I won't have the full control of the piece, and its performance will be different. But that's also the magic of it. So I share every time I perform the same piece, or when I write the piece, I know there's going to be some decision made by the performer. So to achieve all this, there was the creation of new ways of notation. These graphic pieces, some of them observe gestures and movements of the performers too. So it's not just about the sonic result, but about the visual representation. Pierre Boulez stated that there was a need to liberate music for unifying a universally recognized code on which European music has been based for centuries. So now we have, with graphic scores, like a freer expressivity versus the precision from traditional notation. The work, as I say, will be different each performance, and is also open to a wider range of performers. So it doesn't matter sometimes which kind of abilities they have. So it's more inclusive rather than exclusivity, sometimes linked to Western classical music. So how I started all this was because, as George said in my presentation, I do a lot of pieces with other disciplines. So when I was doing some audiovisual pieces with live painting or video with traditional notated scores, I realized that sometimes the connection was not that effective because the performers were to focus on what they saw on the scores and didn't pay attention to what was happening around them visually. So that's how I thought, okay, so let's do these visuals, the scores, so they will feel more this connection with what we see and what we hear. So there are many graphic scores, but I just chose for some of the main composers. So first we will look to Ian Xenakis' Pithoprakta, then John Cage Solo for piano, then Treatise by Cornelius Cardew and Helmut Lachemann's Piano Study Wero. So that's Xenakis' Pithoprakta. So the word Pithoprakta translates to actions through probability, and the piece is based on the statistical mechanics of gases. Each instrument is conceived as a molecule obeying scientific principles. Xenakis drew an analogy between the movement of a gas molecule through space and that of a string instrument through its range. The score represents a graph with the scientific findings to be interpreted by 49 musicians, 2 trombones, either a xylophone or a bootlock, and 46 strings. This is Cage Solo for piano, one of the pages. So this is a clear example of a work with many different possibilities for interpretation. The score consists of 63 pages with different types of abstract paint graphic notation, combined with some elements of conventional music notation. The score is also considered a piece of visual art and has been exhibited in galleries such as the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Different pianists interpret Cage Solo for piano in different ways, and some will perform different interpretation each time they play it. The duration of the piece is not established, so performers must make this decision for themselves, and there are another decisions to be made over the musical parameters. Then Treatise by Cornelius Cardew. It's a collection of lines and graphic symbols which performers should interpret as they wish. Performers take inspiration from different geometric shapes in a graphic score and then translate them into sounds, matching similar shapes with similar sounds. So every time a circle appears, they will use like a similar motif or gesture, and then they will make decisions whether one is bigger or smaller. And then finally, Helmut Lachemann's Wero. So the composer indicates the hand gestures he wants the performer to execute in the score. As a result, the sound that is made has less importance than the action of the hand itself. So there was a very brief explanation of some other graphic scores. So now I want to show some of my graphics and verbal scores. So first one is Pigments, which I created in 2019. This piece is for contrabass, clarinet, mezzo-soprano, and cello. So the artist that you can see in this picture takes the role of conductor. So as she was painting with these pigments and water on the floor, the performers were responding to her actions. So I still had some control because I was giving her like some guidance with how long the piece should be and when more or less the colors should appear. But there was a lot of obviously like aleatory music there. So there's no music notation at all. So the only directions are those you can see, like black is the lowest register and for all of the instruments, and then each instrument has its own color. So also on the space, if you can see the part that is closer to us, so it's more like red and yellow because that's where the cello was placed, and then in the middle is more purple and blue. That's where the singer was placed, and then on the other side was green and orange because this is where the contrabass clarinetist was sat. So as you can see, then black goes all around because it was for them all. So I'm going to stop sharing one moment here so I can share a little, very little excerpt of this. Okay, so we go back to the presentation. As you could see also, the audience was standing up. That's, as George mentioned in my presentation, I'm very interested in creating like new spaces of performance. So I just always try to like audiences not to be just sat there and passive. Like I just would like them to be more involved in the performance and feel free to walk around and see the things happening on stage, or if it's even stage around. So so then the second piece of my audiovisual conversations. This piece is the painting is made by two artists. I have a painting here. So two artists are co-creating a painting, and there are two performers, tuba and piano. So each of the performer kind of follows the artist's gesture. So when the painting was pre-recorded, and then they were following the actions they were taking. So as you can see, this is the tuba score. So yes, I give some directions, but they are just linked to the colors, and they have a lot of freedom within the directions I give. There's some point, which is the extract I'm going to play now, which they change the roles. So it's just trying to take performers also out of the comfort zone. So as you can imagine, for a tuba player to play the piano, there's no problem. But for a pianist to play tuba, it was like a bit of a challenge. So indeed, he was using, because the pianist, he can also play clarinet, so he was adapting like a clarinet reed into the tuba to be able to make the sound. Again, I'm going to stop sharing and share the video. This. I've seen your message. Then next piece is Colin Timbers. This is a piece I did during lockdown, as I couldn't meet with each other. So it's the first piece where I painted myself. So this piece is for two performers. One of them plays flute and bass flute, and the other one plays clarinet and baritone saxophone. So as you can see here, there are two different paintings or graphic scores, which when I was painting them, I was just thinking of how the sounds were going to appear from these colors and shapes. And in the space also, the higher in the painting, the higher in the range, and the lower, as you can see, is black because it was the lower range, and each of them was playing their lowest instrument. The brown background is like having parts of a general score. So the brown background is the one for the person playing clarinet and saxophone, and the white one is for the one playing the flutes. Again, similar to pigments, I gave some directions of which colors, and also in the previous one, how they were linked to different techniques from the instruments. Let's also listen to a bit of it.
Just to let you know, 5 minutes remaining.
Okay, perfect. Okay. And the last piece is Quasi un specchio. I wrote also during lockdown in 2020. So this piece is for, I wrote it specifically for Joan Martí Frasquier, a saxophone player from Spain, who I met during the Mixer Festival in 2018. So he was performing some pieces, and I realized how powerful and how kind of aggressive somehow his low sounds were, and I really was very impacted by it. So then we had some conversations, and because I had then done this piece for instrument, like traditional notation, but I had some graphic for painters that they had to follow. So then we were talking about maybe doing graphic for a saxophone. So this time the score is not a video, it's just like a fixed image. Indeed, this score has been exhibited in London last year in an exhibition. And there were so many, it was also a collaboration, many conversations between the performer and myself. As in the others, the colors define the technique. The horizontal space, as you can see in this picture, is the time and the range, and then the vertical are dynamics. So let's also play a bit. As I would be running out of time if I played all, I just I leave it there. Yeah, and then just saying, like, at the moment I'm working in a more graphic score, and I'm also including a game, so they have still more decisions. So I put like envelopes of different colors, and inside are different graphic scores. So then there is still like more unpredictable music to happen, and that's my bibliography, and that's who performed the different pieces. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a fascinating discussion of your work, your practice. So I'll hand over to Chen for her reaction and thoughts.
Hello. Hi. Thank you for a very refreshing representation. I have a question first. It's like, because the 4 pieces that you just presented, the first 3 seems like they will be drawing and painting in real time. So I'm very curious, like the musician, they have to react in real time too. And how do you conduct rehearsal? Or is there just no rehearsal at all? But at the same time, because you're painting in real time, so there is a narrative logic that say you can control the structure, what happens first and what happens the next. But the last piece, the quasi uno specchio, we're seeing, you said the painting is already done. That means the structure can be very, very different, depends on the soloist, where he would like to start from the corner, or it's just like it's a total impression of the piece. So it's a very different. So I was wondering that whether you can tell us a little bit about the approach.
Yeah. So first about the first one, the one that was live painting. So we had rehearsals like in a smaller paper, you know, like, and then, as I said, I have given some guidance to the artist. So also the performers knew how more or less, when more or less things were going to happen. So the rehearsals were basically more than anything checking the time frames when things were going to happen, or what's the order for them to know, okay, so when the previous performer does this, it means next, you know, sooner or later I have to step in. So also about which kind of sounds I wanted for each, which I was not that interested, but they were really interested, like which sound do you want for this, which kind of flutter tone, which kind of, you know, all the techniques I wrote in the directions. So they were most like a timbric rehearsal, you know, for seeing how seeing how the colors were going to match. About the latest one, it's more idea of fixed, like it has to go from left to right like this. Is the one that, because this piece has been played so many times, he loves this piece, so he's quite popular here in Europe, so every time he goes into, he plays it wherever he goes. Also, he has an ensemble, and he has played this with the ensemble, which is the only time I saw this piece being played so much different, obviously, because you have more instruments, but he's quite accurate when he plays it himself as a solo. It sounds very much the same every time as, of course, when I play a Beethoven sonata, it's not going to be always exactly the same, because every day we have a different day. So it's a bit this kind of comparison, like you can recognize is this piece, because every time he plays it, he has sent me so many recordings, and every time I can recognize is this piece, because it's fixed, and the directions, even that he has some freedom, they are quite specific also, without needing like traditional notation, but there is still quite, you have all the minutes, it's just 3 minutes, so it has all the, when things happen in a timeline, and then how loud, and all the colors and painting techniques, how they have to be performed. So it's always very similar.
And I think most composers often work in isolation, and many composers, including me, we strive to notate our music as meticulously as possible. But it's still very refreshing to write or see a piece that you employ the graphic score approach, or you say like the verbal score, that's open for the performer for reinterpretation, because I think it brings a perspective from the outside. And this kind of creative process, I think it will definitely help to cultivate a much more stronger bond between the performer and the composer. And for the performer, perhaps to have an intimate and very emotional connection to the musical works too. And I think for the audience, especially in this pandemic era, or the post-pandemic future, we have collectively experienced so much like virtual concerts, rehearsal via Zoom. And I mean, we are in a conference that George conducted and organized remotely. So I think for the audience, this kind of performance will give us like an incentive to be able to come back to, no matter it's like a gallery or a musical venue, that you have to be there and to be present, to catch all the fleeting moment and to imprint that in one's mind. And I'm very curious that, because the graphic score and verbal score does give a great freedom for the performer's interpretation. And you just mentioned the last piece, for if he's playing by his own, it's very precise and similar, but when he plays with ensemble, it might be very different. So I'm curious that, have there been any performances that's so unique and beyond your expectation that have a real impact on you as a composer?
So once, so for example, about what you said about like being very precise. So it's like, I feel like I'm like two people, because when I write traditional notation, I'm also very precise. But then this idea was like trying to give the performer some, also to have some decision. And my idea when I made this piece was not to be so precise, but because, I don't know, maybe because we talk so much when I was building the piece, maybe that's why it's always so similar. And yeah, so once when he played this with a flute player, and because for me this piece is low, so for me it was not this piece as I imagined, like I don't, sometimes he plays with other, he plays in various ensembles, so sometimes he plays with other lower instruments, that's fine, but with a flute, it felt for me the atmosphere that I was imagining for the palette of sounds, like very vague palette of sounds of the piece was broken, because the timbre of the flute and the register of the flute were not, when I plan, it's not, when I do a graphic score, it's like, it's all very, I think very much which instruments I'm using, trying to get what I want to get from them. So it's really I really think about it a lot. So how imagine the sonic result of this piece was not including flutes or any high. I wouldn't imagine this piece for strings, for example, like, so for piano maybe, but I would have to change obviously techniques, but will be always in the low register. That's how we start with black and finish with black. It's just this kind of, yeah. But yeah, this one with flute, I cannot say I didn't like it because they were great performers, but it was different to what I was expecting and what I wanted as a composer. So it's like this little control I had, like I didn't even have it anymore somehow. But yeah. So then now it's like, okay, for this not to happen, I'm going to write, well, I'm now doing another one for this duet. So because I want this piece to be played just with low instruments, even if it's not a solo, but to try to keep this kind of heavy sounds from low instruments.
So I guess this is more, like you said, like a control environment. So some rehearse that we still have to explain a little bit more. And I'm also interested in the second piece that you played, the audio-visual conversations. And I think it's very interesting that you asked the artists and the musicians to change their positions. And like you said, to go out of the comfort zone. I'm sure this is a very challenging task for the artists to do. But because you have two artists and you have two musicians, and for musicians, I think we are very, when you are performing, let's say it's ensemble or duet, we are very used to having a musical dialogue between different instruments. But I'm not so sure that that's a convention for the artist to paint. That's something they are used to.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So my question is, in your piece, is there a certain instruction that you want the dialogue is not just between artists and musicians, but between the two artists or between the two musicians?
So it's about all them four, and myself also. When we recorded the video, so this was part of the New Music festival in Manchester, and the topic that year was migration. So I wanted to use as some migrant myself, because I'm Spanish living in the UK. When I arrived here like 10 years ago, this language barrier I found, and how sometimes you have to try to make the other person understand by, like all these conflicts you have just to be understood and understand. So that was a bit of the idea of the overall piece, because these two painters I have collaborated in the past. They're very different. Maybe now the painting looks similar because they've been exchanging their positions. When they started, that one part was fully geometrical and the other part was fully abstract. So I wanted them to also put in other people, on each other's positions and try to see their artistic style, like as the other person, see. And because they were so that's why I chose this too, because they're so different, and their style and their painting preference. So you're just trying to learn from each other, not just say that's what I do, that's my style. And then I wanted to get this also with the performers, to try to get them out of their comfort zone and trying to see what can be the difficulty of playing this other instrument and getting this sound with this instrument you're not familiar with. So it's just, and this idea as a migrant, just living your country and being totally out of your comfort zone also.
Yeah. That's very interesting. Yes, George.
If you have some other questions you'd like to ask, go ahead. I'm just aware of the time, so I want to just, we need to reserve some time for everyone to join in the discussion. So.
Okay, I have a quick question, the last quick question, that for the pigment and for the audiovisual too, I think when you mix all the pigments over and over again, inevitably, even with really bright color like yellow and orange, they would just turn into a darker and darker and darker shade. And it's kind of just like what you let us hear, like the last segment, like all the sound just blend together and become like a sound mask. I find that's a very magical process. So I just wanted to let you know that I really like that part. So I think I'm wrapping it up. So I'll give the floor back to George.
Okay.
Thank you, Chen Yizhen. Paul has put his hand up.
Yeah. Hello. I just have a quick question. Sort of going back to what Ijan was asking about the baritone sax piece. It sounds like up until this point, there's only been one performer for that piece, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's sort of like his piece, and he knows it. He knows what he's going to do with it. If somebody else were to play it, would you prefer that they would take it home and rehearse it, or to sort of like just show it to them the day of the performance or at the performance and let them sort of figure it out on the spot? Have you ever considered how that might be? Because it sounds like even when you were composing, you were painting the piece. I guess composing, painting is the same thing here. You were sort of in contact with him. So would you prefer to have somebody sort of take it as just totally on their own, or would you like to explain some things to them first?
No, like that's the magic of graphic scores. Like, as you said, because in this case, I was kind of in conversations with him, like it's a collaborative piece. So yes, he's very much himself, but even once he showed me how his score is, and he has all like, because I have the painting at home, but he has like the picture of the painting and how he's done which notes when he's going to change the register. You know, he has all very structured, like all the notes around us when I'm going to perform this. I have heard this played by other Bari saxophonists, but all of them are his friends. So I don't know what he told them when he gave them, you know, like do this, or, you know, so and it sounds very much the same, but maybe I should just give it randomly to a Bari saxophonist and see, you know, because yeah, all the other people who play this is through him. So I don't know if he just shows the piece, or or maybe they have listened to the piece in a concert and then they say, can I have this piece? So already they have some, you know, some idea from it because they have listened to him playing it. So yeah, that's a good question, because for me, every time I hear it for Bari sax, it sounds nearly the same, you know, like with the other ones, they other visual conversations have been performed twice and it's been always different, but this one is always the same. As I say, when it's for the same, just the solo. Yeah.
Isabel, I'd like to ask a couple of questions. I'm interested in the piece Coloring Timbres.
Yeah.
How much emphasis or how important is it to you that the visual element is in some way visually pleasing or beautiful? Is there a kind of aesthetic there, or is it a purely a kind of communicative device?
Do you mean like if I care visually? Here, you mean if you care if I cared visually about the result of the painting, how was going to be? No, I was just thinking.
So it's more like a kind of communicative device, and
yeah.
So in that sense, you really are still purely interested in the sonic result that happens, and the visual, the painting aspect is the thing which brings about the sound, but it's not part of the aesthetic object that we're supposed to be paying attention to at that moment. So in a sense, you're sharing with us something about the mechanics of how the sound is, how the players are induced to make a particular sound. So it's almost as if we're kind of seeing your poiesis, the kind of the creation as it's happening.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's also this idea I always have. Sometimes I try to think as a non-musician, even though it's quite hard because I've been doing music, started when I was 4 or 5. But when you see a score, there's nothing more different to music than a traditional score. Like if you hand this to someone who hasn't been in this world, say that's music, how, you know, culturally we link, this is a treble clef, this means this, but it doesn't look like a representation of music, you know, it just for us it does, because that's our culture and that's how we learned it. But sometimes I feel there are other ways, like, you know, sound waves. When we do electronic music, they look like the music much more. So this is a bit this kind of idea. I want to do something that kind of looks more, the gestures. When I do graphic scores, the gestures, what I do is more similar of what the performer is going to do. Like if I do like a very dense black section, you know, it's going to be, you're going to understand like something low and kind of, as I said before, aggressive. But imagine this note written like in a traditional notation would be like a long note on its own, like flutter tone. It doesn't look that, you know, impacting. So many things in traditional notation, they don't look as they sound. It does for us because we read a scores and we know how it sounds. But for non-musicians, they don't have a clue.
So I have a follow-up question to that. That's really interesting. So in the case of Quasi una specchia, how important is it that the score is a graphic score? I mean, or what I mean is, how important is the color element in that score? Because in theory, you could use a whole set of different symbols which represent the techniques and the pitch range or the dynamic range that you want. Why is color so important in that piece? Or why is it such an integral element of the score?
So I think this was because when I was writing my thesis, it was just after finishing my thesis, more or less. So I had, as my research is about joining music and art, so I had been reading a lot about the culture of the colors, and indeed I have this orchestral piece, like traditionally notated, for about the color black and the different connotations of color black in cultures and this. So I had, at this moment, I had all, I'm not synesthetic, but I had all these relations of what this color can be, you know, because I have been reading a lot of like the painter, I forgot his name. The expressionist painter, I'm sure you know, Kandinsky's books about music and painting, and you know, so I think I had this still floating on my brain, and then I don't know, for some reason I thought, I think blue is array sound, and you know, black. There's only one piece I didn't include today because of timing, like which also was like a video graphic score, and then this time in that piece I tried black to be high pitch, you know, to try to remove this kind of dark connotation, like low sound, and I just tried to see if I could take black, which is black is very different colors to all of them. So I try to take this kind of character we always give, like it has to be low, heavy sound, and try to do the opposite. But okay, you can see it's always related to higher sounds, but it just doesn't feel correct for me, at least. So
and I think that's actually because we are all to a degree synesthetic. I think the capacity for metaphorical thinking that is embedded in language in itself. So much of language in itself is a metaphor. We communicate in metaphors all the time. We think in metaphors all the time. And when we create, we're also thinking in a kind of analogical or metaphorical way. So to some extent, we are all synesthetic. It's just a question of degree. So I think in that sense, I can see why the colors in your score would be important in that way, because actually we all react to colors in a certain instinctual way. Thank you.
Yeah, it's like even when we say a low sound, sometimes we will say like a dark sound.
Yeah.
You know, we use this,
exactly.
know.
Yeah.
Well, how can you make it high? It's just, you know.
Yeah. Okay, we need to move on. So thank you very much, Isabel.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.